Hi everyone, and welcome back to The Scene by AFK Pros. This week we're joined by Cam Royal, who's the head of esports and gaming at Veloce. Thanks for joining us, Cam.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I feel like I'm almost certain, Cam, you're the first non-professional player or coach that we've had on the podcast. I think everyone else has come from some sort of competitive vein. Obviously, you're focused on competition a lot of the time, right, in esports in your
Yeah.
role. But yeah, you're the first sort of industry connection that we've had on here.
Well, that's nice. I mean, that's a good change, hopefully. I mean, I'd like to think I'm really good at Rocket League, but I'm probably pretty terrible in comparison. But had I gone pro in Rocket League, I'd definitely be living a different life, given the salaries I know those guys are on. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, no,
I,
happy to be here.
I can remember speaking to, I can't remember exactly who it is, but it's someone from the pro community who said that they came up against you or they were playing with you at one stage or another in ranked. I don't know if it was ranked or casual, but like, are you actually any good at Rocket League, or are you kind of pulling our leg a bit, or
Um, Yeah, I mean, I used to play in turn. I think I competed against the couple of guys now on the Quadrant roster.
okay,
So I think I played Cash, and I played Andy the Mandy, the coach from,
yeah,
um, So yeah, I had my time, but I was never like. I guess I was like more of a bubble player than anything else. And if I
okay,
was a bubble player, I wasn't a very good one. So I wasn't devoted enough to be able to make it pro. But no, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and it's probably my favorite esport, definitely out of all the ones going. I just like how transferable it is and easy to digest it is compared to Dota or League of Legends. Sometimes if you've never played the game, you've absolutely no idea what's going on, and the commentators are always screaming like with excitement. So um, yeah, no, I enjoy Rocket League a lot, definitely. But yeah, I didn't have enough time to dedicate to it, unfortunately.
Yeah, me and Jamie are always saying that we think it's like the esport that just it makes the most sense to someone that doesn't understand esports.
Yeah,
You can
absolutely. Yeah.
never watch a game and then watch a game and understand vaguely what's going on. It's essentially get the ball in the goal. Where you look at Dota or League, and I don't watch a lot of League because it makes little to no sense to me. So someone that doesn't know esports at all, I can imagine that's really really difficult.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool, cool. Well, I think one of the most noteworthy things and things to say to begin the podcast is a massive congrats because you've gone through a promotion quite recently. If I'm not mistaken. Do you want to kind of talk to us a bit
Yeah.
about that? And is your day to day changing much as part of this, or do you think it's going to be along the same sort of vein of work as you've been doing previously?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was head of talent at Veloce for I think just over a year. And then towards the tail end of last year, I got a new offer from them that basically it's everything I've wanted to do, which is it's just head of esports and gaming now across the Veloce group. So we're a multifaceted business. We're not just Veloce. We operate a lot of other white label solutions for a lot of brands, especially in the racing space. But and you guys know very well. We work with Quadrant as well, Lando Norris's gaming brand, and for me to be able to kind of bounce across and juggle all of those different opportunities is really awesome. It's super rewarding. Um, but yeah, to answer your question in terms of is my role changing? I'd say that when I was head of talent, it was very much focused on kind of looking for new faces of people that can be featured in our content or good ambassadors for our clients. Whereas now it's more focused on general strategy for clients within the gaming space. Esports has kind of been my background. It's always been a massive hobby, as I said. With the Rocket League bubble scene, I've always loved playing and competing myself. So to be able to kind of do both, the competition side of the esports, but then also the general business side and the strategy side, the gaming element of my new role is yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's exciting. It's presenting a lot of new challenges, which is what I kind of wanted and what I asked for. So yeah, no, it's definitely a level up in terms of responsibility and workload, but as it should be, I guess, with any sort of promotion. So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. No, that sounds really exciting. Really exciting. And am I right in thinking that you've been at Veloce for really quite some time now. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been here for, I think this is coming up on it's either my fourth or my fifth year. I think it's my fifth year coming into it. So yeah, I mean, in terms of how I kind of got started with it all, you know, I was kind of doing community team management. So, you know, when you're 16, 17, you always want to have a crack at making your own esports team, you know? So, did that for a while. And then I went to uni, studied graphic design, so completely unrelated to management or anything like that. And esports management and stuff like that was just stuff I was doing on the side as a hobby.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, I was working with a brand called Comrade Gaming, and the owners of the brand were like, you know, we're really focused on FPS games, but we want to diversify. We want to get into something different. So at the time, I was never focused and never really interested in Formula One, but for some reason, Formula One esports kind of caught my eye. Still to this day, I don't remember how I kind of stumbled across. It's a very niche esport to stumble into, but for some reason I did, and we ended up kind of recruiting some drivers that went on to go and sign for real life Formula One teams in the Formula One esports series. And then from there, I kind of got the attention of, you know, the guys at Veloce, and I actually tried to get one of the directors into my Discord, because I was doing like a community Discord with popular figures and stuff, right? And off the back of that message, he invited me into the office and kind of offered me a part-time role during uni. And once I finished uni, they offered me a full-time gig. So, you know, I've been there basically my entire
working career,
professional career. Yeah. But, you know, with that, I've got a lot of trust, and they've also got a lot of trust in me. And they've also kind of been really good mentors for me to grow and develop into kind of the role I currently am in, right? And it's nice because, you know, a lot of brands just have kind of one main guy running the show, but with Veloce, it's again, it's multifaceted. So there's 4 different directors that are, you know, you can kind of gather knowledge from and get input from, and, you know, that kind of availability is always nice, and it helps progress your career. I'd say it probably accelerates it because you learn from so many different people, you know, every day. So, yeah.
Oh, 100%. It's really interesting you say about the different directors at the very top, and in terms of also having that adjacent racing side to the business, right? Not just being in esports and gaming. Is there a huge amount of crossover between the racing side and the esports, or is that sort of a bit more separate?
I definitely say that it's definitely separate. It's a different branch. You know, one of the directors' kind of sole responsibility is to manage and run that racing team, right? I'd say that where it kind of crosses over is more on the partnerships element, or maybe sometimes even the content element. You know, we've got some awesome automotive racing influencers who, you know, have a background in the gaming community, but you know, we sometimes propose for them to go and do content activations with our real life racing team in the Extreme E series, which is like a sustainable all electric SUV off-road. You know, I'll throw more words at it if I can, but you know, it's just a crazy series. It's super sustainable, and we sometimes offer up influencers for that to go and film and kind of cross-pollinate audiences basically, and try and get more people in the gaming racing community, you know, into a brand new sport, because that's kind of what it is. So yeah.
That's cool. Very cool. Moving on to talk a bit about like Quadrant, because that's something that's obviously we're very involved in with our player Cash that's on the team that we represent. I'd love to know about like how that initially came about. Obviously that's Lando Norris's brand in conjunction with Veloce, but I'd be fascinated to know how that sort of, it's like birth story almost.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of, it stemmed off the back of COVID, I would say. So during COVID, as you guys are well aware, you know, sporting activations and sporting leagues and franchises couldn't really operate. You know, football kind of had a period where no fans could attend, or even, you know, matches were getting shut down. With Formula One and, you know, motorsport generally, you know, races didn't really happen. You know, they got cancelled. A lot of Formula One's kind of revenue is obviously based off of fans attending the Grand Prix and everything else. So it was quite a tough time for people, and us as a little kind of startup business in London that had a lot of access to gaming influencers, but our directors are former racing drivers themselves, so we've got a lot of connections with real world racing drivers, a lot of them in Formula One, and we were able to put on a series called Not the GP. We kind of claimed it wasn't the GP, but it basically was a GP that you could watch digitally, and we did kind of like a funny collaboration between, we got Lando Norris racing against, Thibaut Courtois, the Real Madrid goalkeeper, right? So like we tried to kind of make it a silly but engaging race for people. We almost gamified it a little bit. And that series did really, really well. That actually brought a lot of viewership and eyes onto Veloce as a brand, but most importantly, kind of what we can deliver as a small startup in London, with our content production and live streaming and everything else, and the connections we had too. And I think off the back of that, Lando's management probably got in touch with our directors, and then from there we ended up formulating the spectacle that is Quadrant, and we wanted Lando to have he's a gamer himself, so to have his own kind of unique IP and his own brand within the space was always an interesting proposition, I think, for him. And he's very much involved in the brand as well. It's not necessarily something that Veloce run by ourselves. Lando's definitely super involved in everything we do, which I think is it's a very healthy thing to have, especially when you've got a global superstar like Lando involved. His time can be limited, but he makes time for his gaming kind of activations and what he gets involved with. So, as you guys are well aware, he was at the RLCS Fall Major in Rotterdam in December. So, he loves to be involved himself.
Yeah. And that was something I was just going to touch on, that compared to, there are so many different headlines and stories you see about sports stars and athletes and celebrities getting into the esports space. But more often than not, in my experience, once you've seen the initial press release, there really doesn't seem to be too much substance behind it. And I won't name any names, but, from first-hand experience, having been involved, albeit loosely and from, over the shoulder somewhat, but having watched Quadrant and seeing Lando's involvement, whether it be at Rotterdam or whether it be in the announcement video for the Rocket League team, he does seem to be an awful lot more hands-on than, I think almost any other kind of celebrity investor or backer or owner that I've seen in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, obviously one of Quadrant's main kind of areas is our merchandise, and Lando's always involved in all of the shoots for that. He's involved in the actual design process itself. We don't want to give him something that he doesn't like wearing, right? And that he wouldn't sell himself. So, it's super organic. And I think that's part of the reason, if not the reason, for Quadrant's success, right? Is just how involved he is. And it's just, he's such a bubbly and natural guy on camera as well. He works really well with the content creators that we integrated into that brand. And they're actually, they're really close friends now, all five of them. So it's an interesting one.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's cool to see, because I think Jamie might have touched on it. I think there's an awful lot of inauthenticity within, especially over COVID, when esports had its huge boom of traditional celebrities going, okay, that's booming, how can I attach myself to it without ever being into gaming or anything like that? And I think Quadrant's a good example of the opposite, for instance. There's something that he's been passionate about before he was in it, and then it feels natural when he comes in, and he can build on his personality and bring things up with him. So I think it's a really nice contrast to what was a bit ugly beforehand.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, even at the Fall Major, Lando's talking about how he's a keyboard and mouse player, right? And he's got the live crowd behind him, and a lot of them were giving cheers, because it's quite uncommon in Rocket League. But that organic nature of him actually being a gamer is always going to help the brand for sure.
Yeah. Out of interest, way back at kind of day one, when you guys as Veloce were having these conversations with Lando about making Quadrant, was the name Quadrant and the brand, was that already decided, or was that part of the process as well? You guys figuring out what will Quadrant look like, or were you guys mainly just trying to apply something that maybe Lando had already made, applying that to the esports space and picking which games he might enter or which talent he might work with?
Yeah, I think again, Lando's very much involved in everything A to Z quadrant. So even at the start, we would always float ideas by him and stuff like that. But I think they also kind of instilled trust in us and confidence in us to be able to pick a name that was catchy, that did make sense. I think the origins of the name is because we had at the start, we had 4 creators that we were pairing up with Lando to be in Quadrant, and that's where the quad kind of comes from. That's why the logo has the 4 different parts in it to make up the whole queue, right? So that's hats off a little bit to Jamie, our director, and most certainly our designer, Evan, when he was constructing that. So I think Lando just kind of fell in love with the idea once we proposed it to him. But he definitely had a say in kind of the branding and everything else.
Yeah, cool. That's really cool. Yeah.
Awesome. I'd love to talk a little bit more about sim racing. I mean, that was my first ever esport that I was like passionate about. It's interesting to hear you say that you sort of fell into it accidentally. But I'd love to just like discuss that as an industry, because I think it's in such a fascinating spot currently. We've got the virtual Le Mans this weekend, which should be really, really cool. Am I right in thinking there are some Veloce cars in that as well, or is that are you guys entering into that this time?
Yeah, so Le Mans this year we normally enter 2 cars, but this year we've decided to enter 1, just because we're working with different customer teams. Mercedes being one of our customer teams is kind of utilize some of our talent that we would normally use. So we've kind of combined our 2 entries into 1 this year. We're super excited. It's always a really cool event. I mean, you've got Max Verstappen on there, you've got the Formula 2 champion, Formula 3 champion, all getting involved. So to see them kind of combat in the virtual sense is always interesting. But Jonny, I actually didn't know that you started out in the kind of the sim racing industry. What was your go-to game for that?
I mean, I've always been a league racer, so I've always like league raced in the F1 games, which I really fell in love with over COVID. So yeah, that's something that I've always been like really passionate about and playing. I've got my small little rig at home, which is always good fun. But yeah, I mean, I've obviously. I remember you talking about the Quadrant guys. Like for me, sim racing was a huge thing. I've always watched Super GT, and like to see what he's been doing recently is really cool. I'd love to get your opinion on the direction you think sim racing is going, because I think there's a lot of rumors in the scene and about things how might change. And you look at comparing events like VCO on ACC, compare that to, for instance, maybe a more esports style event like the V10R League or that sort of thing. Do you think that it's? I guess my question is sim racing an esport in the traditional sense? Like, does it need to be gamified, or should it be more like real racing, just virtual in terms of format?
In terms of format, I'd say that's where gaming probably has a +1 on traditional motorsport. I think you're seeing a lot of leagues nowadays, like VCO is a notable kind of organization that's really pushing the boundaries of racing formats. I think they've done a race recently where it was a 24-hour race and they had 24 different cars every hour, 1 car for every hour in the race, which is a really cool thing because, you're seeing all these varieties, you're seeing all these different drivers have to combat, the handling differences between all the cars. I think format, when it is gamified, can be really interesting. We even saw that with our Not the GP series. We took traditional Formula 1 races and we made it kind of wacky and fun as well. So, and viewers love that. That's why the viewership does so well for VCO. It's why it does so well for the Not the GP series when we launched that. I would say that in terms of kind of where it's going, you're seeing a lot more traditional motorsport brands outside of just Formula 1 brands getting involved now. Porsche has always been quite heavily involved. Audi. I know Audi's kind of announced its kind of entry back into Formula 1, but they've always been a traditional kind of GT-based brand. So you're seeing all these manufacturers getting involved now, which is great. It's going to propel it more. I think the fact that you've got the current Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula 3 champion doing the virtual Le Mans series is kind of testament to the fact that these simulators and these games are so similar to real life. That's one of the advantages that sim racing has, I think, over any other esport, is the fact that you can train and we've seen it proven. You can train on a simulator and then go and compete in a real car, and it's people are doing very well. We had a driver last year, Lucas Blakely, who went to the Race of Champions, which is like a off-road snow drifting racing championship. He won the simulation portion of it, or he placed on podium for that, and it got him an opportunity to drive in a real car. And how that championship worked was that they paired real life motorsports celebrities against these sim drivers, and unfortunately for Lucas, he got paired against Sebastian Vettel, which is a pretty household name in motorsport. But to everyone's surprise, he actually ended up winning the race. Like that is mental. So for a gamer to have that sort of opportunity to be able to actually train all their life on a simulator and then go and simulate it in a real life car is pretty fascinating. And I think that's the main advantage that sim racing has over any other esport. I think the closest you can really get is potentially something like Rocket League, in the concept where it's everyone can understand it, which we've kind of already touched on, but it only relates to football in real life, whereas sim racing is directly transferable. So
yeah. No. I was just going to comment that I think that's all really interesting, and I was going to say, I don't know how involved, keeping on the kind of sim racing vein, but maybe having some comparisons to esports. I don't know how closely involved you are on like the sales side of what Veloce does, but I'd be really interested to hear if you've got any insight in your experience how sponsorships within sim racing can compare to, or your interactions with sponsors can compare to, say the esports space, whether that be for Quadrant Rocket League or Quadrant Halo or something that Veloce might be doing.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of kind of our partnerships team, I mean, our head of partnerships came from F1, so we've definitely got a lot of organic and traditional motorsports-based partners taking an interest in what Veloce does, and especially for our customer teams. And we deliver sponsorship campaigns for our customer teams, with our in-house production team. So I think in terms of how I think it's a lot. It's more unique to go and sell a partnership in motorsport, because again, it's a niche, right? It's a very niche sport to be interested in. I think when you're looking at Quadrant Halo and Quadrant Rocket League, those games have been around for a while. Halo in particular, Quadrant has the backing of a global celebrity like Lando, and you're able to do a lot more in-person activations with all of the esports events that take place, right? Whereas for the most part, and partly due to COVID, but sim racing hasn't really had the ability to get that track record of in-person events yet. We haven't really seen a full-on year of every single competition is doing a LAN event, and I think that's kind of where it needs to progress to for non-endemic brands to start getting interested more in the sim racing space, definitely. But again, from the Veloce side of things, we're always able to come up with really creative and interesting ways that we can, take a Coca-Cola, for instance, and put them into, a sim racing oriented environment and make it actually work for the brand,
Yeah.
And that's an interesting challenge for us. And I think, that creativity and that ability to come up with these sorts of solutions is really important for us as a brand. And I think that's why we've kind of had the success we've had, is because we are able to kind of think out of the box and do things a bit differently than traditional motorsport would normally think.
Yeah, and I guess that's where you create the value and provide the value to the partner teams, right, or the customer teams that you take care of.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the partnership element, but it's also kind of the internal talent management that we do. We've got a really awesome team of talent managers here. A lot of them have professional sim racing experience, which always helps. So I think it's kind of twofold. For us, content is king, and partnerships work very closely with our content team, obviously. And then we've got our kind of talent department and our network side of the business that kind of churn and are the cogs in the machine when it comes to customer teams and everything else.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. No, that's really interesting. Thank you. And again, keeping in the same vein of sort of the behind the scenes and the industry side of Veloce and how you guys are interacting with different stakeholders like sponsors and customer teams. Something that we've got kind of written down in our notes as a talking point that I really wanted to bring up was in the new year. I don't know if you've noticed this on places like LinkedIn and Twitter. There seems to be a little bit of a doomsday vibe coming from certain people in the industry talking about how, this might be a tough year for esports and those organizations that haven't diversified, outside of pure performance, that they might struggle this year. And I think Veloce, in terms of esports organizations, is positioned incredibly uniquely because of all of the different strands to the business, and even within the esports side, right? You've got Veloce's own projects, then you've got the customer projects, then you've got Quadrant, and content is such a massive part, and we were discussing that quite recently, so I'd love to hear your opinion on, some of this commentary in the industry, and if you think some of these teams that maybe haven't diversified quite as much may struggle, and your general thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, even recently there's been a lot of layoffs at 100 Thieves, for instance. And actually some surprising layoffs. It's not like they're laying off interns, they're laying off, fully integrated members of, their senior management, right? So it's, it's always scary to kind of see that stuff. I think traditionally esports has always thrived off of partnership opportunities, right? And when partners no longer, when world's going into recession, when partners no longer have a surplus of capital to start spending on, gaming activations, I think it becomes quite worrying for esports-based teams that really rely on that. A lot of esports organizations aren't profitable. A lot of them really rely on those partnerships because, the prize money split for them normally isn't a lot. And, the only other way they can really make money is through merchandising and content, right? So for us, in terms of Veloce being uniquely positioned, I think we've, we're a content first brand. We always have been. And for us, content it's always a safe bet for anyone, there's a lot of large OEM, manufacturers in the world that want to have their traditional brands like Michelin or whatever do a gaming activation, and they always kind of come to us to formulate that content because we're the biggest in the space in terms of the racing gaming community, and with kind of the other assets that we've got going on and the experience we have in house, we're almost like a one-stop shop for anyone that wants to do anything. And I think one of the things that goes quite unnoticed, and our CEO recently posted on LinkedIn about it, but Veloce has a wider network of talent. So, we've got our front-facing customer team talent that are getting involved in, McLaren, Mercedes, Quadrant, they're on screen. But then we have a wider play where, we've got people in India, we've got people in Russia and Brazil and wherever it may be that are generating content on, games from GTA to Minecraft to racing games. And, for us, we generate a monthly viewership of, 500 million plus every month, which is mental, right? And that's something that we can kind of offer to brands and plug into. We can, if a brand wants to go and target people in India, we have someone for that, And I think that's kind of how we've differentiated ourselves is, a lot of teams have focused on getting more partners and expanding into different esport games and getting more esport teams, where if we focused on the content side of things and getting more creators and getting more, real world assets in Extreme E and things that we can kind of offer that are fresh and new, right? And I think for us as a business, something that makes all of that quite tangible is the proposition of like Web3. Web3 is something that is probably going to be happening. It is already happening, but I think it's, especially this year, going back to your main point of how our organization is going to kind of get out of this, is it is it a negative time right now in the world? I think so, definitely. But I think, if brands start to pivot towards kind of the future, and it's seemingly growing that Web3 is kind of the answer to that, and digital ownership. I think that's a very enticing way for brands to kind of recuperate and start finding actual value in in their esports teams or in their merchandise or whatever it may be, outside of just selling it or them competing, you know?
Yeah.
No, 100%. I think it'll be a very interesting year for the industry as a whole. I think it will be a year of mergers and acquisitions, and unfortunately, I think some esports orgs will go under. But I think the scene as a whole will come out of it stronger. I do think it's sort of in some parts it is necessary, because there have been these brands that are thriving off purely venture capital money, and that's how they're staying alive. And it'll be interesting to see that innovation, to find more revenue and to find more sources of that revenue. So yeah, it will definitely be interesting comparing the space now to the end of the year. 100%.
Yeah.
I'm quite excited for it, actually. I think the industry has been needing somewhat of a shakeup. I think, there's a lot of brands that have been launched within the past, 2 years, 3 years that have just kind of followed suit with, what the FaZe Clans are doing, or the 100 Thieves, or Cloud9, whatever it may be, these big kind of legacy brands that have been in the space for a while. But I think it's somewhat refreshing that, people are actually having to evaluate their business models now. And they're starting to have to get creative with it. And I think that's only at the end of it, like what you're saying, Jonny, even if there are mergers and stuff, it's going to force people to really push the boundaries of what the gaming industry can do and the esports industry can do. And yeah, I'm quite excited to kind of see what the new year brings.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully it encourages like disruptors and more innovation. I mean, I always go back to the example of Carmine Corp. I think that's like, as a new excitement, I think they're amazing. I think what they're doing is brilliant for gaming and for esports, and it's elevating the esports product. And I don't think we've seen an org do that as well as them for some time. So I think there's definitely still space for innovation within the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree with that.
Yeah. I was talking to an organization quite recently, and it's not the first time, but it was certainly one of the first times that I've heard them talking quite a bit about consumer products and about how that's a space that they might try and break into. And rather than, I mean, as well as getting sponsors, as well, actually looking at building their own tangible product, products that they can sell in shops and put in shop windows. And, do you think that, and I thought that was really quite, again, going back to what Jonny was saying, refreshing and innovative. It sounds silly that actually creating a tangible product is being considered innovative, but I think in our industry at the moment that's where we're up to. But yeah, I can't really think of, certainly coming from UK esports and EU esports, many examples of when I've walked into a shop and seen a product from my favorite esports team, or my favorite esports player. So do you think that's a space that maybe Veloce or other organizations might pursue in the near future, trying to capitalize on that audience it's built and actually put real products in a shop and in a marketplace for people to purchase beyond just merchandise and the kind of things that are now maybe a little bit older?
Yeah, I think there'll be more digital shops than physical ones. I went to the RLCS World Finals in Texas, and I went to a Target, and there was an optic controller in there, and that for me was the first time, I've seen a gaming brand physically, selling things. So yeah, I think digital shop spaces and shop fronts will be popping up. It's kind of just dependent on, Fnatic, for instance, they have their hardware line, right, and their merchandise line, and their partnership with ASOS and stuff. And I think they're kind of arguably the pioneers, and that somewhat forward thinking in terms of the hardware element and the shopping element of it all. They're really the only esports brand that I've seen that's successfully started to actually construct and manufacture their own unique hardware, right, as opposed to getting a sponsorship and a partnership with Logitech or SteelSeries, whoever it may be. So yeah, I think they'll start to pop up a lot more. I think really they have to start commercializing their audience in a very organic way, not a way where they're starting to run ads on everything, but in a way where they can actually sell products and maybe even services that their audiences can get behind and actually find use in. Because I think that's another thing with the gaming community is that they're very, very quick to am I allowed? I can't swear on here, can I? Probably not.
Go for it.
Okay,
Feel
yeah.
free,
Well, they're very keen to sniff out the bullshit that a brand's kind of putting out there, right? So
Yeah.
if a product is, if someone's marketing it a certain way and saying it does something, within an hour of their launch post going out, someone's going to come out with a comment saying, well, actually,
Yeah.
that's not the way it is. And I think gamers have always been at the forefront for innovation, I would say, and it's very hard to get stuff past them unless it's concrete, And I think a lot of brands need to also take that into consideration when they're building these shop fronts. Is you have to make sure you know what your audience wants and know that they're actually going to get behind what you're marketing. Because if they don't, then it's going to flop instantly, and you'll have wasted however much money on research and development, only for it to kind of get flushed down the drain a little. So yeah.
No, that's really interesting, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. And there's some examples that instantly came to mind, even in the last kind of month or 3 weeks, that I've seen announcements of press releases of partnerships or product launches, and the audience really just does not receive it well. And like you say, people can definitely sniff it out. And I think being such a social media native audience and community. If people don't like something, it doesn't take long for that to spread and that sentiment to be shared. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point.
I think exactly hitting the nail on the head. It's different to the sports industry. You look at like Neon when it came in to sponsor lots of stuff in esports, that was shut out immediately. Like within a week, it felt like Twitter was exploding and then it was gone. But then sponsors McLaren and there's much less backlash. So I think it's a very interesting point that the esports and the gaming natives are so interested in what's sponsoring their sport and what they're interested in. And it's interesting to see that it may, in some instances, stop investment into the scene.
Yeah, but I think it's also a case of even with the Neon stuff, it's hard to imagine that even people in Saudi, the own country of Neon, it's they're still kind of like, oh, I don't really want that to be associated with League because for X amount of reasons. But it's just interesting to see that globally, and I guess that's the nature of the internet, when it first was created anyway, but the fact that all these communities are so tightly woven without brands actually kind of being able to realize that. You might launch a product in the US, but there might be a Brazilian super fan base, that is kind of backlashing against you, and then all of a sudden the American fans are like, oh yeah, actually that doesn't make much sense, and then you've got it's just a weird kind of dynamic. And I think gaming's really the only industry that has that sort of passionate fan base that is so passionate about scooping out the truth and making sure products are actually what they say they are.
Yeah. I think it is quite unique like that, and I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because it is just generally a much younger demographic, which is maybe more aware or cautious of social justice issues. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I think it's definitely quite unique in that respect.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the surviving brands will just figure out that market better, right? And the surviving esports orgs will understand which partnerships and which way of doing things are the best and providing value. I think that's something that I always get back on and look at when I look at esports orgs as a business, is what value are you providing besides essentially hiring players and then selling sponsorships off the back of them? What value creation is there? And I think the ones that create the most value in that middle will be the ones that have the most success.
Yeah, definitely.
Going back to what you said about Veloce, it's that providing value for their customer teams or providing value through that. I think that's a really healthy way of doing things compared to some orgs where it's just simply we hire these players and then off the back of their performance we sell sponsors. And I think those will be the orgs that really, really struggle.
Yeah, exactly. I'm keen not to take up too much of your time, Cam. So I think the final question from my side, and one that I really wanted to cover, was getting your opinions in terms of sim racing. Right, it's obviously a space which is caught on massive growth over the last few years, and I know there's some projects behind the scenes that different stakeholders in the esports space are working on, which will hopefully propel it forward. But in terms of it trying to attract fans and grow as an esport and as a sector, do you think it needs to try and pull esports fans? Convert a CS:GO fan or a Valorant fan or a Rocket League fan to sim racing, or do you think actually sim racing's best approach is to try and target the massive market, which is real life motorsport, and try and bring those fans into the fold and convert them to actually appreciate and recognize and consume sim racing content?
Yeah, I mean, we always say that sim racing is a niche within a niche. It's a niche within the motorsport niche. And I think, yeah, I mean, there's a league, Rensport is hopefully launching, I mean, it will be launching this year in partnership with ESL, which, we would like to think brings a lot more eyeballs because ESL being so established and, directly correlated with these traditional esports brands, hopefully we see some of them migrate into sim racing. And I think that will in turn, obviously sim racing then, if that happens, is going to be promoted to the CSGO fans and, League of Legends fans and everything else. But I think for them to actually grasp hold of sim racing as a concept, you have to kind of get behind the storylines of the drivers. And that's why Formula One kicked off so much, is because Netflix launched Drive to Survive, and all of a sudden people realize that there's so much drama between the teams, and it's that drama that really creates the yeah, everyone loves drama, and it's that drama that creates the on track action, and like that's when people start screaming when Lewis is going past Max, is because there's tension between those two, right? And I think in sim racing it's quite challenging, and because it's such a fresh industry and an esport, it's quite challenging to get that drama at the moment. I would say that it's it does rely on people being invested in motorsport as a sport, and kind of understanding the rules and the reason why people are making certain moves on track the way they are, and that sort of thing. I hope that Rensport and ESL can kind of propel that a little bit, and I almost want them to kind of challenge the Formula One esports series to really push and elevate and see what it can do, even with traditional esports brands, or how can they market more to the esports fans as opposed to traditional motorsport fans. But I'd say to your question, yeah, I think it needs to appeal more to the motorsport fan base at the moment. Okay. And once you kind of hit the ceiling of that, is when you can start branching out and trying to get these esport fans in from different games. Because again, it's similar to what we're talking about with the digital shopping experience and product launches and stuff. It's like people are very particular with what they want to watch, and we especially find that with sim racing, and that's kind of why we as a company have a niche in it, because no one else really thought to kind of gauge it and go into it, right? And I think people are very stuck in their ways of what they like to watch and what they like to consume. But equally so, I think if anyone's going to kind of change their mind, it's definitely going to be the gaming community and giving something a trial.
Yeah. And just a follow-up question from that, going back to what you were saying about the different personalities and the tension, it's obviously it's that narrative and those stories which builds engagement. And this might be a bit of an uncomfortable question given your relationship with some, sim racers, but do you think the sim racing community has got the personalities to help elevate it? Do you think there's scope for there to be that tension and that beef, or do you think the people currently en masse are maybe not that way inclined?
I think that for the people that have, I mean, these sim racers have to put in hours and hours and hours. It's like any traditional esports player, right? So to some extent, a lot of the times they are kind of, they can be robots, and they can just, they all get along. And because sim racing is so niche, I keep saying it, but because it is, everyone is friends in the community, and everyone wants to see the sim racing community get lifted up, right, to the next level. So I'd say right now it's a bit premature to have kind of those storylines. I think it's going to be more on a basis where you're going to have people arguing whether they want to watch Formula One esports or whether they'd watch something like Rensport, right, or SRO or Le Mans. I think that's where the feuds are going to kind of come in, and the drama is going to happen. It's not going to be until you have the same drivers that are performing well in Le Mans kind of compete across all the different championships, and they're doing it in a live setting, right, where tensions can actually and emotions can kind of be captured. Right now, it's all digital based. Everyone's at home, comfortable. I think it needs to kind of get a little bit of a shakeup before it can get to that drive to survive level.
Yeah.
I think it would definitely be interesting to see how Rensport performs, and how that, if you get through the presence of traditional orgs, do their fans buy into it, and do their fans buy into those storylines and the stuff that ESL is going to create. I think it'll be definitely a very interesting year for sim racing, and see how the whole community reacts around that. 100%.
Yeah, we're really excited for it, definitely. I mean, it's going to be I'd like to think it would be quite a hard year for Rensport in terms of, it's a brand new game. It's a brand new kind of way of formulating a sim racing tournament and a league. If they do bring in traditional esports brands, how do those fare up against the likes of Mercedes and and Williams, these big brands that have been around for a long time. So yeah, no, I'm excited. I think it's going to present a lot of unique opportunities. And who knows? I mean, maybe we'll get the likes of FaZe coming to us and saying, "Hey, can you help us out with our driver lineup?" Because it's such a unique esport title to be involved in. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time, Cam. Really, really appreciate your insight on all of these different topics we've discussed. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
It's always good speaking to you guys.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks,
cheers, Cam.
Bye-bye.